There is no denying that UFC 300 is a landmark show in the history of our little sport. It's insane to think that we ever even got to that number. If you'd have told me in the early 2000s when I started watching that there'd be a UFC 300, I'd have punched you right in the face for being a liar. But here we are, and I thought it would be fun, since it's fight week for the big show, to run the numbers on all 299 of the previous numbered UFC events to give you a stats-based sense of where we started, where we've gone, and where we're going next.
What's up, Fight fans? Unless you've been living under a rock for the past few days, you'll know that UFC 5 dropped its biggest content update since launch. And it's directly for you, the fans. 30 new fighters are being added to the game between April and June. People like MVP, Benoit Saint-Denis, Nassourdine Imavov. With this significant amount of UFC fighters being added, this makes it the most substantial post-launch update in UFC gaming history. It's all kicking off with this update in April, where players are getting access to 9 new fighters ahead of UFC 300. Movsar Evloev, Brendan Allen, he's been on a big win streak. Marina Rodriguez, we need more fighters in that division. Mohamed Makayev is going to be a lot of fun to play with. Sergey Spivak to give you some more heavyweight options. Jeff Neal, who's been highly requested by the community. Umar Nurmagomedov, who has a really cool skill set. Tracy Cortez, and Diego Lopez, who is fighting at UFC 300 against Sadiq Youssef. And what makes this update even better is this update comes at no additional purchase cost to yourselves. More on this later, alright, but for now,
I'm Tommy from MMA On Point. A massive shout out to our channel Hall of Famers, and these are mind-blowing stats about the first 300 UFCs. If you count the day of the event, and I'm going to because the actual pay-per-view won't be starting until 10 p.m. EST, UFC 300 will take place exactly 11,111 days after UFC 1, which took place on the 11th month of the year, November. That's a lot of ones.
I'd like to introduce you to what is called the Ultimate Fighting Challenge. You notice the ring is a little bit different than a normal boxing ring. It's more like a pit.
You know what's even stranger than that, though? UFC 300 is 300 in name only. Literally, any other way you look at it, it's incorrect. Of course, it's not the 300th UFC event. It will be the 687th. That's because of all the fight nights. You know, the events that pretty much air every week and aren't pay-per-view. It's not the 300th pay-per-view event either, when you factor in the non-numbered pay-per-view events of the pre-Zuffa era, as well as several cancellations and the 7 numbered cards that aired directly on Spike TV.
UFC 75, champion versus champion, coming Saturday, September 8th at 9 to Spike.
UFC 300 is actually the 291st UFC pay-per-view event. Now, surely it's the 300th numbered card, right? I mean, we can all count 1 to 300.
Nate can only count to 5.
Well, no, actually, it's not that either. Because if you considered the 3 events that were canceled outright, 151, 176, and 233, as well as the random-ass times they decided to add a 0.5 to an event in the early days.
Hi again, everybody, and welcome to what we're calling UFC 37.5.
300 will be the 302nd numbered UFC card that has actually taken place. So yeah, this whole thing is a lie.
Your name is Harry, isn't it?
Is UFC 300 even taking place in Las Vegas? If you didn't know, it would of course be a good guess on the location. The city is the longtime headquarters of the UFC, at least starting in the Zuffa era in 2001. And it wouldn't take some kind of superfan for you to have deduced that the City of Sin is the #1 location for numbered UFC cards, which of course it is. There's been a staggering 97 numbered events in the capital of lost wages. That is nearly a third of all of them, but that's easy. What's the second biggest pay-per-view venue of all time? Well, they've been all but abandoned now, or cursed with the worst cards you can think of, but Canada is actually still in second place, at least for now, with 21. Nearly all of those coming during the GSP era. There's been 20 cards in California, 14 in Texas, 13 in New Jersey, a vital location for getting the sport sanctioned. Fascinatingly, Brazil and England have the same amount of numbered UFCs with 12, which is crazy to think because for me, England has only recently felt like it's been a hotspot for the promotion, as much as they tried in the early 2000s. But things have also slowed down a ton for Brazil since the heyday of Jose Aldo and Anderson Silva, so I guess it makes sense. Rounding out the top locales is New York with 11, Abu Dhabi with 9, and Australia with 8. All the venues for numbered cards up to 300 have collectively earned an insane $840,122,255 in total disclosed gates. Now that's a giant ass number.
That is such a big number. I couldn't fit it that way.
but it's a giant number that doesn't tell much of a story. It gets really interesting though when you break things up by eras. Let's go by 100s since we're celebrating UFC 300, right? So from the start of the promotion to UFC 100, disclosed gates hit 143 million in total, with the average gate being 2.4 million. From 100 to 200, those events saw a pretty substantial bump, as you could imagine, totaling 280 million at the gate, with an average of 3.1 per show. Here's where things get crazy though. From 200 to 300, the gate total spiked to 415 million, with gates now averaging $5.3 million. That is ridiculous. And guys, the venues haven't gotten any bigger. There's not suddenly a bunch more seats everywhere. So after I discovered that spike, that got me thinking, what's the average ticket price? You ready for this? Average tickets from 1 to 100, 189 bucks. From 100 to 200, 199 bucks. From 200 to 300, $304.
I got a couple bucks.
You gotta take out a second mortgage to go to UFC events now. What's even crazier is that the UFC is not making the majority of their money from ticket sales. After all, this is a company that reportedly brought in $1.3 billion just last year. That's more than every disclosed gate combined since the beginning. Their big money makers are sponsorships, merch, rights fees, and of course pay-per-view buys. Now, unfortunately, the UFC has not been as forthcoming with their buy rates in recent years, but that didn't stop me from finding every single one available from all three time periods to give us a sense of how that's progressed too. The average buy rate up to UFC 100 was 338,764. Not a bad number considering the promotion's early struggles. And that would see a pretty solid boost in the era leading up to 200, averaging out at 480,270. Now, the modern era was harder to pin down, but I was able to get 60 of those cards, so I think we can at least entertain an average for events up to 300, and if these numbers are right, it's a huge increase, 607,748. Now take that with a grain of salt because it could be the result of a lack of data, or possibly more likely, the UFC only ever letting us know when a card does great. But God, given how good business has been with all other averages going up,
complete sellout.
I would not be surprised, motherfuckers. But who cares about business? That's not our money. Let's talk about actual fighting, damn it.
I have been lifting weights and doing cocaine all day!
The Octagon has seen an insane amount of action in all the cards leading up to 300, with more than 2,500 fighters having competed in the UFC. That group has landed an insane 549,640 significant strikes, scored 16,215 takedowns, knocked their opponents down 3,279 times, many of which likely led to the 2,523 knockouts we've seen, or maybe they grabbed a choke after they did it. There's been 1,516 subs after all. 3,448 fights have gone the distance. That is a minimum of 36 days straight, non-stop, of people beating the shit out of each other in a cage. Now, those big old numbers are fun to think about, but what is really fascinating is the number of fights in the different time periods and how much they've increased. From UFC 1 to UFC 100 was about 15 and a half years time, and there were 1,168 fights total. Cut that time down a ton, getting from 100 to 200, they made it in just under 7 years, and added more than double the fights at 2,590. Just shy of 8 years is the amount of time that has passed since 200 to now, and in that time, the UFC has put on 3,864 fights. That is a 49% increase in fights since 2016. So what does that mean for now to UFC 400? Surely they can't increase that much more than they're doing right now, right?
I'm pretty tired.
And yes, the growth in number of fights has decreased over time since there's only so many weeks in a year, but if the current trend continues, they might be able to squeak in an extra 23%, which would put UFC 400 at around mid-2031.
I'm a cybernetic organism, living tissue over a metal endoskeleton.
After about 4,752 fights, assuming humanity still exists by then. Let's be honest though, most of those fights aren't of too much consequence, are they? Especially as those numbers get higher. But what about the ones that do matter? What about the headliners, the champions? I ran the numbers on those as well, and fascinatingly enough, in the first two eras, 1 to 100 and 100 to 200, there were just about the same number of title fights headlining numbered cards, 92 and 91 respectively. With the era leading up to 100 300 seeing 43 new champions crowned, and the time leading up to 200 from then only seeing 30, which I think is a testament to just how dominant the champions were of that era. The vast majority of non-title fight numbered card headliners also took place during those two time periods. There's actually been 63 numbered events that were headlined by a fight that was not for a divisional title, a trend that has decreased a ton in the time from 200 to now, as the promotion's seen a big bump up in title fights and new champs. 141 championship fights have gone down with 60 new champions awarded. That's double the previous era. And when you look at consistent headliners over the years, that substantial increase in title fights and new champions shows in the lack of recent star power, as the vast majority of all-time top numbered card headliners are from eras gone by. Randy Couture and Anderson Silva top the list with 17 each. Current champ John Jones has 16, but he's mostly of the era from 100 to 200. After that, it's old-timers like Tito Ortiz, GSP. The only guy to get into the double digits from the modern era is Israel Adesanya, who has headlined 11 numbered events. You know what's even crazier though? 42% of anybody that has ever main evented a numbered card only ever headlined that one time. Tough racket, this mixed martial arts, which is probably the only consistent through line from 100 to 300. Anyway, hopefully this run through of the numbers has given you some perspective on how the UFC has evolved over time and where things might be going in the future. For now, let's just hope everyone makes weight on Friday and doesn't UFC 200 this whole thing, you know?
As I mentioned earlier, there's been a massive update for UFC 5. With these community-driven updates, they are releasing over 30 new fighters along with some massive changes to the game as well. That's all happening over the next 3 months, and it's at no additional cost to players. Whether you're an existing player or you're brand new, it has not been a better time to jump into UFC 5. Especially with UFC 300 just around the corner. To help celebrate this, you can download Mike Tyson at no additional purchase cost. From April 10th to April 15th, all you got to do is jump into UFC 5 and claim your Mike Tyson. So let us know what you think, what fighters you're most excited for. Be sure to hit the link down below to check out all the information about the update and dive into UFC 5 on next generation consoles today.
I'll tell you who should headline the next pay-per-view though. Our channel Hall of Famers. Thank you all so much, you guys are the best. Maybe don't headline because I don't want to see you get beat up. If you want to be as awesome as them, hit the join button down below. All kinds of exclusive content. You might even have some say in our videos. Like and subscribe if there's one stat you found out about today that you didn't know about already. Leave a comment with your UFC 400 predictions. And thank you so much for watching, guys. It is on to the fights for me. I can't wait.